Yeah, so we've been going through Ephesians. We're up to Ephesians chapter 3, and so I want to continue with that today, so it should be good. And Greg did Ephesians 3, 1 to 7 a few weeks back, and so we're going to go from 7 to 13. And it's really Paul, and he's continuing to unpack just the gospel and how he sees it, and he's speaking to the Ephesian church and to you and me. And he's from verse 7. He says, I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace given me through the working of his power. Although I am less than the least of all God's people, this grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the boundless riches of Christ, and to make plain to everyone the administration of this mystery, which for ages past has been kept hidden in God who created all things. His intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms, according to his eternal purpose that he accomplished in Jesus Christ our Lord. In him, and through faith in him, we may approach God with freedom and confidence. I ask you, therefore, not to be discouraged because of my sufferings for you, which are your glory. Mate, it's quite a heavy piece, isn't it? And I don't know, I was reading a commentary and it was saying that actually, and Ephesians is one of these books where people, and I found myself doing this actually, we often sort of skim through some of these sort of meaty kind of pieces, and then we go for the prayers, these apostolic prayers that he has written in there. We go, wow, that was awesome, and then we just go through find the next one, and we don't sort of unpack these sort of other parts to it. And when I first read it, I was thinking, okay, that's interesting, but as I started to unpack it, I was like, wow, God, this is incredible. What Paul is sharing to the readers. And so in the first verse there, in verse 7, he talks about becoming a servant of this gospel. And it's a reflection actually of in verse 1 where he says that he's a prisoner of Jesus Christ. And so that prisoner, it wasn't Jesus or Christ who imprisoned him, it was the Romans. He was in prison, and he was under house arrest. And over that time he was he didn't complain about it, did he? He didn't blame it on the church. He didn't blame it on the Romans. He didn't blame it on God. But he was like, I'm a prisoner of Christ. See, he was a prisoner because he believed that the Gentiles had the same access to God that the Jews did. That was the gospel. That was what he was sharing. And so there's this in his heart. There's this, a reflection of being aligned versus being yielded. And he was yielded to God. It didn't matter what happened. He was like, what, God, have your way. And there was a sense of being yielded. Whereas when we're aligned, alignment's kind of like, hey, this is all awesome. I'm with you. When something goes wrong, I didn't see that coming. I'm not so happy about the situation anymore. I'm going to question your authority. I'm going to actually, I don't think I'm going to come under you anymore. And that's the difference between aligned and yielded. And with Paul, he was yielded. And so there's this challenge, I think, for us. It's like, are you aligned or are you yielded? When things don't go your way, when things don't happen the way you expected it to. And I was thinking of my life and looking at, has there been a time where I felt, something really happened and where it took me out of it? And when I was just out of university in my master's year, we did a project with a company, and it was to model what was called labour scheduling, and it was great fun. So it was to try and model demand patterns for labour, and we loved it. We got to work with a company, an airline company, and so we got to go around Christchurch Airport, and we got to see how the baggage claim works and how the cleaners work, go through the planes, and and all the different requirements to keep these flights going in and out of Christchurch. And we had this, we could write the software, and I worked for a company called Pay Global, and it was great. It was like we were doing something that only three other companies in the world were attempting to do at the time. And we were sort of right at the edge of, software development, and it was so exciting. And we did 3-4 years of this. We were planning and designing, and I was with my friend Andre, who I'd done the masters with, which is actually Bianca's son, and we'd gone right through school together, and it was like, man, this is awesome, And then we poured our hearts and souls into this role. And the company and the team developed from about 5 people, and we went right up to about 40. And we were like, man, this is fantastic. And midway through this development, we got to a place where I'm going to around this one. See, if I trip on that one. We got to this place where actually the management decided they wanted to pull back, the delegated authority that they'd given to the team. And so just out of the blue, they set everyone down in this boardroom meeting, and they just basically said, hey guys, you know what, we're taking total control of this. Everything that you were thinking of doing, planning, we're not going to do any of that, and we're going to do it this way. And honestly, it was like a Hollywood movie. Like, it just blew up. I've never been in a meeting where it has imploded so badly. People were jumping up, shouting, throwing things. 4 people quit on the spot and just walked out, didn't even get paid. It was like, stuff it, and they just left. And my heart, it was just, and Andre's heart, we were like, what the heck just happened? Like, 1 minute we were like, we thought we were going to conquer the world, and the next minute it just got annihilated. And within about 2 or 3 weeks, half the employees had just left. And I remember going home to Beth and thinking, man, where's God in this? Like, I thought this is what we were supposed to be doing. And it just, my dreams and my hopes were totally just shattered. And through that, and I remember thinking, well, what am I going to do about it? Am I going to rage against God or am I going to go, actually, God, what are you doing in this situation? How do you want me to position myself? And it was a real watershed moment for me personally, because I'd invested so much. And within about 6-8 weeks, we left New Zealand. We felt the Lord say go, and we talked to a travel agent, and they've given us some advice, and so we headed over to London, and that's where we set up and worked. And looking back now, like, if we had not gone, and if we had not had those opportunities when we were in London to save, and that money helped us pay for a deposit for a house, it set us up financially going forward. It allowed me to take on this role now that I have. And I think, man, God, I'm so thankful for what happened. But at the time, it was like, I can't see God in this. This is a disaster, And so the question is, are you aligned or are you yielded? See, Paul was yielded. So verse 8 and 9, he says, although I am the least of the Lord's people, this grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the boundless riches of Christ, and to make plain to everyone the administration of this mystery, which for ages past was kept hidden in God, who created all things. Have you noticed, that people can so easily get proud, can't they? They can so easily get confident in what they have achieved. And they forget their past, they forget where they've come from. They forget who's helped them, who's supported them. They've forgotten, basically, the grace of God. They've forgotten that God's had a hand over their lives, and that they've been put into the situation that they're in. And you see, Paul never forgot where he came from. In 1 Corinthians 15, he said, I'm the least of all the apostles. You know, he realised and that he remembered where he came from in the persecution that he dealt out to the early church, the early believers. You know, in his zeal for God, he allowed people to be murdered in his name. He stood by, held the cloak of the people who stoned Stephen to death, and he approved of it in Acts. And so he never allowed him to forget. He always remembered his past. Not in the sense of that it would stonewall him and that it restricted him and he was like, oh man, I'm so awful, I can't do anything, you know, don't ask me to do it, I'm not the right person, there's better people out there. You know, it wasn't a false humility, it was actually, he stayed humble. He always remembered where he had come from. And that's why he says that I'm the least of all God's people. In Proverbs 26, it says this. It says, do you see a person wise in their own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for them. Man, I love Solomon. I love the Proverbs. They're just so succinct. It's like, actually, you don't sort of have to unpack it. I discovered that once. I remember trying to preach on a proverb. And afterwards, the guy who was reviewing said, you know what, Proverbs are designed that's the truth, that's the statement. You know, and it's really hard. You can't sort of further unpack it. It's like, that's it. You know? And I was like, oh, okay. But you know what? Wise in their own eyes, isn't it? You know, so it's a gateway to self-reliance and self-pride. Like the moment you think that you have arrived, you have ceased being teachable. Because you know it. You know, don't ask. You know, I don't need to know. I don't need to ask advice. I don't need to read the latest. You know, in software, it's like I don't need to read the latest developments because I know it all. You know, and the moment you stop, you have that starts to rest in your heart. You stop moving forward, and that's the danger for us is that we've got to stay humble. We've got to still remember our past and remember where we've come from and remember what God did in our lives. And that just reminds us again, actually, of just how amazing the cross is, how amazing what God did on it. And our hearts stay soft. They stay teachable. So Paul, yet he's so humble, but yet he's so confident. You know, it says in Galatians, it says that he went, after many years of preaching to the Gentiles, to, you know, you and me are out, to the Middle East, he said, he went back and he talked with the apostles, and it said that in Galatians, he says, and they had nothing to add to my message. You know, and I think, man, that's a bit arrogant, isn't it? And it's actually, no, his spirit is saying, no, I know who I am. I've received this revelation from Jesus himself, and I know the ministry that I carry. And so there's this mystery, isn't there, to how God's grace and how it operates. And often we think of grace in terms of salvation, in terms of the moment that we've come to faith. But in this passage, Paul's actually not talking about his conversion. He's talking about his ministry. He's talking about his day-to-day walk and working and dealing with people. That this grace is actually an equipping grace. It is a grace that enrolls you into work. It is a grace that enrolls you into not being passive. That he's saying that I now have a ministry. That grace that I received vertically, I now have to administer it out. I have to give it to people. How are you giving out your grace? What does your ministry look like? Because he doesn't say paid people. He didn't say worship leaders. He didn't say cell group leaders or teachers or doctors. He just said, you who believe. Like each of us have got this grace, and yes, it brought us to salvation, but also that grace is there to equip and enroll us and equip us to to minister and to administer that grace to others. I was reading I went to what was Pioneer Ministry, and I know a few of you went. Ivy went last weekend along to it. It was in the town hall, and it was Joseph and Leslie Lee, and they're from the North Island, and they for about the last 10 years or so have been working in the islands and going around Fiji and Samoa and the different islands and running healing meetings and revival meetings and different things out there and seeing amazing stuff happen. And I thought, I'll grab his book, so I bought the book and I read about his backstory. And it's a fascinating backstory. He was an audio sound engineer, and he sort of in his late 20s. He had a business of one. It was just him. And apparently a contact of a contact of a contact got his name. And a guy he'd never met him before, he came and had a meeting with him, and had a big 90-page dossier on a conference that was being run in Fiji. And this was in about 2014. And this guy said, Joseph, I want you to consider putting in a contract to take on this job. And it was a UN United Nations meeting that's the biggest one to that date done in the Southern Hemisphere for all the prime ministers and different bodies all were meeting in Fiji to have a conference, and they wanted to live stream it all around the world so that anyone could see it. And this guy's like, I think you should do this, and he felt the Holy Spirit say, yeah, take it, And so the long story short is that through an incredible series of kind of events, he won this contract. And it was quite hilarious, even to the point where China sent a container load of sound gear to Fiji for an audio-visual gear, and of course all the instructions were Chinese. And they're like, oh my goodness, who do we use? And they're going through these referees, says, oh, Lee, he's Chinese, he'll do it. And Lee's actually also is a Scottish name. And so he didn't know a word of Chinese. But they thought, sweet man, but they go and Skype this guy, and he's a little white guy, and they're thinking, how does that work? But it was incredible, God's hand on this guy, and he gets this contract for the UN of all things, and he's one guy. And guy's like, I'm in this, trust me. And he goes to these meetings, he meets people, and the story is quite incredible. And anyway, so the short story is, on the way back, going toing and froing from Fiji, he, just running this business as a young, 30-something, he's on the plane and he's looking out the window and he sees a stretcher being wheeled into the plane. And it's this kid who's in a coma. And they've taken out the business class seats, and they rustle this, and this guy comes literally in on a gurney, a trolley, and they roll this thing into the business class. And he just feels that the Lord says to him, I want you to pray for him. And he's like, oh, no. He has done no ministry, right? He's just a businessman. And God says to him, I want you to pray for him. And he's like, oh. And then he's like, well, and he obviously had travelled a bit because he knows that, if you go in business class, the curtains are closed, don't they? So you have peace from the cattle class who can't see behind as you sip your champagne or whatever happens in business class. And so he said, oh Lord, if that's you, I tell you what, if the curtain gets left open, I'll go and pray. That was his sort of bargaining thing, And so he lies back, turns on the movie, sort of one eye looking down, thinking, nah, it's not going to happen, And of course, midway through the movie, the hostess comes along, opens it up, and it was like the veil being opened, goes into the kitchen, and she leaves it open. And he's like, oh my goodness. So unclips his belt, shuffles through, and walks up to this gurney and into the parents who were there, who were just filled with anxiety, looking at their son just stretched out on his bed. And he says, do you know what? I'd love to pray for your son. Would that be okay? And they just leaped up. Yes, please, And so he just starts praying there right in the middle of business class. And before he knew it, he said it was like we were holding hands with the parents. And he said it was like the presence of God just came down, and he started getting really bold, and he was praying, God, we just speak life into this young boy, and I just believe you're going to raise him up. You're going to, he started prophesying over this kid, just wholeness, and he said the place was silent. Everybody was watching, they're all like looking over, and but no one said anything. The flight attendants watched, and there was sort of like this holy kind of moment. And it was because the kid who was, people could see, man, his hours for death, like there's very little hope for this one. And so no one said anything, and so the parents were super grateful, and they exchanged numbers, and that was it. Walked back, sat back down, and didn't think much more of it. The next morning, gets a call. Joseph, you wouldn't believe it, but our son's awoken. He's come out of the coma, and he's like, wow, that's incredible, and apparently they had gone to been taken to the hospital. No one had actually attended him or examined him, etc. But he had given him any medical treatment, but he had woken, and it was such a miracle. But they said so once he had woken, the New Zealand doctors, they did examine him, and something still was not right, and they found that he had caught some sort of fever that had put him into a coma, but in addition, he'd had a stroke, young, like 18, 19, and paralysed, couldn't move, like legs, there's no movement in the legs. And so they told Joseph this, and he's like, right, I'll head down there. So he jumps in his car, races down to the hospital, and they just started praying for him again. And while they were praying for him, they saw the legs started to move again, and the toes started to wiggle, and he was healed before their eyes. Now, what is incredible is that when he got chatting to them, they were pastors. And they were like, Joseph, you've got to come back. You know what, we've got a church. Well, you come over, and we'll just open up. You just run whatever you want to do, but just pray for people for healing. Okay? So that's how it started. A prayer at 30,000 feet on an airplane opened a door into his ministry. See, there is grace. If you would just step over. It's like, this is what Paul is saying. He is confident. The grace of who he is in God. He has no confidence in himself. But he's like, I know the God who I have. So I'll get up and pray for someone if God asks me to. And just that simple act opened up a ministry that now he does full-time, travelling through islands. And he's been, I think they're on about their 6th one in New Zealand. And he's been to the States and different places. All because of one prayer. Imagine if he hadn't done it. Imagine if that person really said, oh Lord, I'll pray if that curtain, was open. And he was watching a movie and he thought, oh, nah, stop. That was just dreaming. Maybe his business would have grown to 3 people. It starts with hearing his voice. There is grace, and I bet you he started as nervous as, he fumbled his way through the prayer, and he didn't do it, perfect. He probably would have done it differently now to what he did. You know what? It doesn't matter. God's grace is there, and he will move. He's looking for people who would agree with him and who would align himself with him, and he'll work through you. In verse 10, it says, his intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms, according to his eternal purpose that he accomplished in Jesus Christ our Lord. Isn't that awesome? So he's saying that what Jesus did on the cross, that the wisdom of that world thought was foolish, the wisdom of that is going to be displayed, it is going to be demonstrated, it is going to be enforced, it is going to be shown through the church. Through you and me. Through Joseph saying a prayer at 30,000 feet on that airline. And not only that, it's the unity of the church. It's the unity of the people that we are all one in Christ. That the unity that God restored in relationship between us and God is also a unity that goes out between each other. And it will be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. So he's saying that every demon, every spiritual authority is learning about the stunning work that Christ did on the cross through you and me. As we step out and we align ourselves with God. Isn't that incredible? Rulers and authorities, you look, it's said about 4 times in Ephesians, and it's talking about the rulers and authorities in the negative sense. He's not talking about so much about the angelic, he's talking about the demonic. And he's saying, man, they are scared in their boots because they are seeing God's kingdom being pushed out and advanced through his church. It is being displayed amongst his people. In verse 12, in him and through faith in him, we may approach God with freedom and confidence. I ask you, therefore, do not be discouraged because of my sufferings for you, which are your glory. Wow, what a yielded guy. He's saying, I'm suffering for the gospel. I'm in prison right now, but it's a demonstration of his glory. And it's your glory, because I am fighting on your behalf that you have the same access to God that the Jews do. And it's not through any rules and regulations, it's through relationship, it's through what Jesus did. And so Paul's focus there is on this connection to the Father. That it's not a future thing, but it's right now. You know, that grace gives us confidence that we can hear from him. That when we step out, that he will back us up. And maybe we make mistakes, but that's okay. You know, the grace is there. So don't be discouraged because of suffering. You know, the bottom line is that you have access to the Father. And there's freedom there and confidence to go to the cross. You know, in Jesus we have someone who is fearless and strong and yet tender and meek. I remember as a kid watching Our World. Who remembers Our World? Do you remember the program Our World? Yeah. When I was Saturday nights, I think we used to have pikelets and cream, and we'll just sit down and watch Our World. And I remember watching, the African ones. I used to love those ones of the desert. You know, they'd follow the hyenas or the cheetahs or this or that. And one of them was they did one on crocodiles. And they're fearsome creatures, aren't they? You know. And I remember they'll track the wildebeest doing their annual migrations, going across these swollen rivers. And these crocodiles would just be sitting in these rivers, you know, and they'll wait and they'll wait and they'll wait, and they had to cross. And so they would cross, and then, and of course, these massive crocodiles, apparently I was reading about them, up to 7 metres long, 1.2 tonne, 1,200 kilograms, some of them weighed. Did you know that they have 5,000 pounds of bite pressure per inch? Put that in perspective, where our jaws can do 100. Apparently their bite strength is 10 times that of a great white shark. Like when they grab hold of something, you know, it's over. You know, it's the power and the pressure that they have is incredible. Apparently they have the strongest bite in the entire animal kingdom. And I remember watching these creatures, and they literally, you know, wildebeest, zebras, antelope, they'll just sit in there and then wham, and they'll grab hold of it, a fully grown, you know, bull, and they would just pull it under. That was the strength that they had. And then they showed this clip later on. It's like the same crocodiles would pick up their eggs. And they'll pick these eggs up and take them over and place them in the nest. The same jaws. 5,000 pounds of pressure per inch. And they could grab an egg and move it without breaking it. That gives you a picture of what biblical gentleness and meekness looks like. God has all authority and all power, and yet He can reach out to us in such tenderness. Do you know, I don't know, you've probably met people and who are big and strong and who can enforce, and yet often do it in such a way that it's not, do it and it's not done with grace, is it? And it's like, and it can wound people. And then you have others who are really gentle and kind, but in the moment where you want them to stand up and show authority and strength, they can't do it. In Jesus, we have this amazing picture of someone who has total authority and who can command demons to flee, who can stand up to hypocrisy, can turn over the tables in the temple, who can, even knowing that what he's going to speak out is going to cause people wanting to kill him, that he will do it anyway. And yet shows such tenderness to others who have got nothing left, who just need the gentlest touch, and who can restore them with one word. That is who we have as our Saviour. He can apply the most incredible strength in the most tender ways. Think of Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Think of the woman caught in adultery. Think of the woman by the well. Think of Peter, who thought he had totally stuffed it by denying Jesus 3 times at the crucifixion, and yet in a simple conversation totally restores him. That is the God we have. And Isaiah spoke about him in Isaiah 42. This is prophesying, and this is him looking forward. One day he said, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations." Man, what sort of person can bring justice to the nations? Not just to a little community of Oxford or to New Zealand or to the nations. How do you resolve the justice of world wars and 3,000 years of strife and bitterness and envy and pride and everything else that's in the human heart? He will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out, or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break. A smouldering wick he will not snuff out. I never realised, I was thinking this is talking about Jesus in terms of that he will be beaten but not broken. No, he is saying that this is my servant, a bruised reed he will not break. A smouldering wick he will not sniff out. Have you been in a place where you've got nothing left? You feel like that flame has been utterly extinguished. When you've got that little flame and it's got the tiniest of glows that if you breathe on it, it's just going to go out. He is saying that this king who is going to bring justice to the nations is going to deal with that tiny little flicker of life and actually not snuff it out. That his surgery and the way that forensically, take that tiny sort of minute dimmer of glow and actually restore it, bring it back to a fire. And that is what Isaiah is saying here. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged. Man, have you thought, how did Jesus not falter or be discouraged? How do you do that? How do you do that when you get betrayed, when people hate you, when they twist your words, when you teach one thing and then they report it in a different way. Like how do you do that when you lose your father? And you know, because he did. He would not falter or be discouraged. Man, it's like, see, he looked to the Father. There's probably times where he was like, God, I just need to hear your voice, because I just can't do it without you. Show me the perspective in this situation. And he did. And he wasn't discouraged. And he didn't falter. He carried on. It's incredible. I get discouraged all the time, you know? And I think, and man, look at what Jesus had to push through. Imagine the spiritual attack that must have come on him at times. And he didn't get discouraged. Like, imagine the revelation he must have had in his prayer life when he was just sitting there asking God, journaling or whatever he did, you know, that he never got discouraged. That is the confidence that Paul has. He is saying you can have absolute confidence in the Saviour. He has total authority, and yet he will not yet let a smouldering wick snuff out. I remember 2 times, just finishing, where I've experienced that. Once I was in the city mission. I was 19 years old, and I used to help on the night shift. I just volunteered there, and for the what do they call it? It was like the night shelter. That's the word. The night shelter. So all the street people, if they had nowhere to go, they'd come to a city mission and they'd have a place to stay. So you can imagine the different people would come in stoned. They'd come in glue sniffers, violent people, all sorts of ones, you know, who hadn't showered in a month. You know, it's just the sadness of humanity would turn up and would need a place to stay. And also I was on the front desk, just trying volunteering and helping out. And I remember one night I was there, and this guy, this big Polynesian dude came in, and I mean, he was like 3 times the size of me, tattoos all over his face, and intimidating as heck, you know. And I remember he said, I want to come into the kitchen, I want some food. And I was like, well, sorry, there's no food available, you've missed dinner, you know, it was a couple of hours ago. And he was like, no, and he started getting quite, you know, aggro, and here's me going, no, the kitchen's closed, you know. And I was thinking, man, this could be worried. But the good thing was, you see, it had a glass counter, they couldn't get to me, or, you know, I was safe. So I was feeling strong, you know. And I remember I went to the toilet, came back, and somehow, and there's this big, long, like, hallway goes along beside the reception, and then there's doors that went into the main front area, etc., and then round the back went to the kitchen and the bedrooms, etc. And I remember I walked out towards this, and this guy was in the hallway, and he starts walking towards me, you know, and he's just like, and I was thought, my goodness, oh, excuse me, sir, you know, you're not supposed to be in here, you know. And he was just like, I want food in the kitchen, I want food. And I thought, man, what am I going to do? My heart is going 100 miles an hour, you know. And in a minute, and he just came walking towards me, and then suddenly he just stopped, turned around and went back. And I was just like, whoa, what happened? And I turned around, and the night guard was behind me. And he was just standing there like this. He didn't say anything. And he was bigger than that guy. And he had dreads that were like right down to here. And I was like, man, you're my best man. I love you. He didn't say a thing, you know, but it was like, he was just, his presence alone was like, don't mess with me. He had the authority to back me. And I didn't even know he was there. That is the God that we have. On the other hand, I remember a few years ago in Hamner, and it was just a really, we run a Hamner retreat, and which I volunteer and help on, and it was 3 days of praying for people, ministering, and I remember at the end of that 3 days, I was just absolutely shattered. I was so tired. It was just full on all the way through. And I remember at the end of it, I was just sitting, and for whatever reason, I hadn't, no one had prayed for me that year, and I was feeling a bit like, God, do you see me? I've given everything, and is it, what do you think? Is it okay? Sort of wanting, I guess, do you see me, God? And I was just sitting there in the seat, and a pastor came up to me, a good friend of ours actually, from the North Island. He said, actually, Ian, you know what? I believe the Lord wants you to know that He is so proud of you about how and the way that you pray for people, and he just went bang, 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 and man, I just felt pieces. I was like snot going down my nose, and I was bawling, and he must have been thinking, what the heck, But my heart was just in such like a tender place where I was like, God, I've given everything. I've just got nothing left. Do you see me? And it was like in this moment of like, it was just like, man, that was God. Like He spoke to my heart in that moment. So we have that God, in Jesus, we have all the authority, but we have this person who is so tender and so gentle with us, that if we come to Him with every need, that He will meet it. And so that grace is there for us. It is not there just for the moment when you gave your heart to the Lord. It is for your ministry. And He wants you to give out and administer that grace that you've received and administer that to other people. So I want to encourage you today to do that, to step out. Who knows, it might be a prayer at 30,000 feet that just opens things up for you. I don't know. But I'm not in your family. I'm not at your workplace. I'm not in the classroom at your school, but you are. What's God saying to you? What grace does He want you to give out next week?